With Deion Sanders' exciting arrival to Boulder, Colorado, it looks like the CU Buffaloes are finally poised to make a return to national prominence. However, Deion's made it clear he's not the only one coming to bolster the ranks of the Buffs.
We got a few positions already taken care of because I'm bringing my luggage with me. And it's Louis.
Deion's expected to be bringing a host of talent with him, including #1 overall recruit Travis Hunter, as well as his son QB, Shedeur Sanders. Today we're going to be taking a walk through the last 2 years of Shedeur's collegiate career, seeing if he can lead the CU Buffaloes back to football glory. Let's get into it. We'll go ahead and pick things up in Shedeur's junior season, but first, let's take a look at who was on the schedule for the Buffaloes this year. The season kicked off with 3 fairly easy non-conference games against Colorado State, Georgia Southern, and Hawaii. Shedeur would go ahead and take this opportunity to get familiar with his new offense and rack up over 1,200 yards and 11 TDs in the process. Colorado rolled through all 3 games with ease and headed into conference play with a comfortable 3-0 record and a ranking in the top 25. USC and Stanford would prove to be the first big test on the schedule as Colorado entered into conference play, and Shedeur and company would be ready. The Buffs jumped out to an early lead against USC at Folsom Field, and the offense would roll that day as they put up 49 points to maintain the lead and take home the win. The next week down on the farm, the offensive explosiveness would continue as Shedeur would put up nearly 500 yards and 4 TDs in a rout of the Cardinals. Over this 2-week period, Shedeur continued to improve on his stat line of the year, adding 800 yards and 8 TDs. Heading into ASU week, Shedeur and the boys felt great at 5-0 and ready to take on the Sun Devils in Tempe. However, this game would prove to be much tougher than originally thought, as new head coach Kenny Dillingham had ASU ready to play. After a back-and-forth first couple of quarters, CU found themselves up 17-14 just before the half with the ball and a chance to add more points. But a fumble on a Shedeur scramble would end in points for the Sun Devils as they would scoop it up and take it 74 yards to the house and get the lead. ASU would maintain this lead throughout the second half, pushing it to 34-27 midway through the fourth. And on 4th and 2 with just over a minute left to play, trying to keep the drive alive, Shedeur would take it up the middle on the draw and be stuffed by the Sun Devils defense as Colorado suffered its first loss on the season. Coming off a tough loss at ASU, CU somehow managed to stay in the top 25, coming in at number 19. And these next couple of weeks would bring their first couple of top 25 matchups of the season. First, Shedeur and the boys had to travel to Autzen to take on Oregon in a game that would certainly lived up to the hype. Oregon would take an early lead and hold on until 14 seconds left in the game when Shedeur led the CU offense 96 yards for the game-winning touchdown drive. The following week brought on another electric matchup back home against Arizona, in another game that would take late game heroics for Shedeur to push to OT. But in the second overtime, after scoring to make it 45-44, the kicker would miss the PAT and Colorado would suffer its second loss of the season. After suffering their second conference loss, Shedeur would fight a bounce back game on the road against UCLA as he and the Buffs would return to form in a comfortable 35-21 win, thanks to 500 yards of offense and 4 TDs. Colorado would try to bring this momentum back home, but the synergy was stonewalled by the number 8 Washington Huskies as they jumped out to an early lead and never looked back. Shedeur continued his high-powered output, but surrendered 2 costly interceptions on the day, which would indeed cost them the game. Colorado would look to finish out its season with a couple of easy wins against teams that have struggled to find success on the year in Oregon State and Utah. Shedeur continued to struggle to take care of the football in both of these games, but still found the end zone with regularity, leading his team to wins in both games with a combined 756 yards and 8 touchdowns. This would bring a conclusion to Shedeur's junior season, and he would tally an impressive stat line, including 4,800 yards passing and 48 touchdowns on the year. For this insane output, Shedeur would be rewarded the Heisman, as well as the Maxwell, the Camp, and the O'Brien Awards. After an absolutely dominant performance against Texas in the Alamo Bowl, Shedeur would be back for his senior campaign and looking for a lot more than personal accolades. A championship was on his mind, and the road to the championship started with Colorado State and San Jose State. Once again, the first couple of games serves as a tune-up for the surging Colorado squad, but their senior quarterback experienced a slow start to the season, totaling just 300 yards in the air, but still finding the end zone 8 times. Nonetheless, Shedeur and the boys were ready for the bulk of their schedule. The Buffs would kick off their Pac-12 schedule with a top 10 matchup against Oregon at home, and they would show up to play this day, dominating the Ducks for all 4 quarters to secure a 42-24 win. In this action, Shedeur would return to his reigning Heisman form, dialing up 433 yards and 4 touchdowns. Colorado would continue their dominance under their star QB, crushing UCLA 41-18 the following week as Shedeur repeated his 5-touchdown performance from the week before. This performance would put Shedeur back on the #1 watch spot on the Heisman list and lift the Buffaloes to #5 in the polls. Coming off this #5 ranking, Colorado would catch #15 Stanford at home for another massive top 25 showdown as the Cardinals came for revenge after last year's embarrassing loss to Shedeur and company. After a back-and-forth game, Stanford would tie the game at 31 with just over a minute to play. However, this left just enough time for Shedeur to lead the squad 75 yards to pay dirt to win the game with just seconds left to play. The following week would be even more of a perfect performance as the Buffaloes headed into the Big House for a top 5 showdown against #2 Michigan. However, it did not appear as if the Wolverines had come to play, as Colorado would take a 28-7 lead at half and they would never look back. Shedeur would rack up another 350-yard game with 4 TDs to lead his squad to a #2 placement in the polls. The energy of the massive back-to-back top 15 wins would start to carry this Colorado squad through the season, starting with a beatdown of USC at the Coliseum, in which Shedeur would have yet another 400-yard 5 TD performance. He would outdo this performance the following week in a revenge game against ASU with a 6 TD performance, tallying his 6th of the game with 17 seconds left to win the game yet again for the Buffaloes. The scoring numbers would relax the next week for Shedeur, but he would still lead his guys to a 42-35 win over Oregon State at home to push their record to 9-0 with a top 25 rematch in Seattle on the horizon. With memories of last year's embarrassing loss to the Huskies in mind, the Buffs would make the trip up to Washington with a business mindset, and it would show. After a tight first half, the Buffaloes would score 3 unanswered touchdowns to separate themselves from the reigning Pac-12 champs and would never let up, ending the game with a 42-28 victory on the road. The following week's matchup against Utah would be more of the same as Colorado would cruise to a 30-20 victory off the arm of Shedeur. He would go ahead and total another 800 yards and 8 TDs over these games as he tries to continue the campaign for back-to-back Heismans. With an undefeated record on the season, Colorado would get the privilege to play for the Pac-12 championship. And they would draw the rematch with Washington, but this time at home and in the snow. The Huskies took the lead in a half 21-20 after much back-and-forth action, but the entire second half would turn into a defensive battle. With a little over 2.5 minutes to play, Shedeur would help his team retake the lead, but Washington would answer back to tie the game at 28 a minute later. With 90 seconds to play, Shedeur would make magic once again and help his team find a score with 21 left on the clock and would seal the game and win Colorado its first Pac-12 championship. This, however, would be the beginning of the end of Shedeur's good fortune. He would come in second in the Heisman, and even more disappointing, Colorado would be bumped out of the national championship game by Clemson and Georgia despite going undefeated. Colorado would catch Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and would play an amazing game in which Shedeur would find magic one more time to drive his team down the field and tie the game up late in the 4th. However, he would go on to miss the remainder of the game with an injury, and Ohio State would go on to win the Rose Bowl in overtime, shattering the Buffaloes' dreams of an undefeated season and a national title.
So what did you guys think of that senior season? Did Shedeur get robbed of back-to-back Heismans? Did Colorado get robbed of a national title opportunity? Let us know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe check this one out, where I go into character as Earl Frozen and take over the U.